The ICU monitor screamed in unison as the old man's fist connected with the security guard's jaw, sending him crashing into the medication cart. Blood sprayed across white walls. 3 more guards rushed in, only to be thrown back by a dying patient who moved like a trained killer. Doctors shouted for sedation, restraints, lockdown. But trauma nurse Sarah Mitchell saw what they missed: the defensive stance, the calculated strikes, the whispered coordinates that shouldn't exist. When she spoke 5 words in a language the military had buried for 30 years, the violence stopped. And that's when the real danger walked through the hospital doors. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something. Follow along until the very end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel. The fluorescent lights in Mercy Point General's intensive care unit hummed with the kind of monotony that Sarah Mitchell had learned to find comforting during her 12 years as a trauma nurse. It was 3:15 on a Tuesday morning in November, the graveyard shift in Cedar Falls, Washington, when most emergencies arrived wrapped in silence and the smell of antiseptic. The kind of night where she could almost predict which patients would code before dawn and which ones would surprise everyone by hanging on until their families arrived. She was reviewing charts at the nurses' station when the ambulance bay doors exploded open. Incoming, male approximately 70 found unconscious in Morrison Park. Possible overdose, malnutrition, exposure. The paramedic's voice carried the clipped efficiency of someone who'd seen too many homeless deaths that winter. Vitals unstable. He woke up violent during transport, had to sedate him twice. Sarah grabbed her tablet and moved toward the trauma bay, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. Through the small window, she watched them wheel in a skeletal figure strapped to the gurney, restraints cutting into wrists that bore scars she recognized instantly, the kind that came from zip ties and interrogation chairs, not accidents or surgery. Dr. James Reeves, the young attending who'd transferred from a comfortable private practice in Seattle 3 months ago, was already snapping on gloves with the impatience of someone who viewed homeless patients as a waste of his Ivy League education. "Another one?" he muttered, not quite under his breath. "Third this week, security should just drop them at the shelter." Sarah bit back her response and focused on the patient. His eyes were moving rapidly beneath closed lids, his breathing pattern too controlled for someone supposedly unconscious. The sedation should have knocked him completely out, but his body was fighting it with the discipline of trained resistance. "Heart rate's climbing," announced Kelly Torres, the newest nurse on rotation. "Should I increase the—" The old man's eyes snapped open. What happened next took less than 4 seconds, but would replay in Sarah's mind for years. The patient's right hand twisted free of the leather restraint, with a movement that shouldn't have been possible, given how tightly the paramedics had secured it. His left leg shot out, connecting with Dr. Reeves's sternum and sending him stumbling backward into the crash cart. Before anyone could react, the old man had rolled off the gurney despite the IV line still attached to his arm, landing in a defensive crouch that belonged in a military training manual, not a hospital room. "Get back!" Kelly screamed, scrambling toward the panic button. 2 security guards burst through the door, Marcus Chen, a former college linebacker, and Tom Briggs, who'd done 2 tours in Iraq. Sarah had seen them handle aggressive patients before with minimal force and maximum efficiency. But when they moved to restrain the old man, he moved like water around their attempts, using their momentum against them in ways that left both men on the floor, gasping within seconds. "Sedate him! Now!" Dr. Reeves shouted from behind the overturned equipment. Sarah watched the old man's eyes dart around the room, not with the confusion of someone disoriented, but with the calculated assessment of someone counting exits and cataloging threats. His breathing remained steady despite the exertion. His hands were up in a combat stance that was definitely not civilian self-defense. "Wait," Sarah said quietly, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. A 3rd security guard arrived with a taser. The old man saw it, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, but recognition. He grabbed a metal bedpan and hurled it with enough force to knock the weapon from the guard's hand. The taser skittered across the floor, coming to rest near Sarah's feet. Dr. Reeves was on his radio now, voice shaking. "This is Dr. Reeves in Trauma 3. We have a violent patient, possible psychiatric break, requesting immediate chemical restraint authorization and additional security." The old man's eyes found Sarah's for the first time. There was something in that gaze, Not madness, not confusion, but a desperate kind of clarity. His lips moved, forming words that only she was close enough to hear. Perimeter breach. Hostiles inbound. Need extraction coordinates. Sarah's blood went cold. Those weren't the ramblings of a drug-addled mind. That was military terminology, spoken with the clipped precision of someone whose training had been beaten into muscle memory decades ago. She took a step forward, ignoring Dr. Reeves's shouted warning. "What unit?" she asked, her voice low enough that only the old man could hear. His eyes widened fractionally. For the first time since he'd woken up, his defensive stance wavered. Sarah's father had been Special Forces Vietnam era, and he'd taught her things that most nurses would never need to know. Like the fact that certain military units used coded phrases that changed with every operation. Like the fact that soldiers suffering from severe PTSD sometimes got trapped in old missions when their stress responses triggered. Like the fact that the worst thing you could do was treat them like they were crazy. She scanned the visible scars on his arms, the way he held his weight, the specific defensive positions he'd used. Then she saw it, a faded tattoo on his left forearm, partially obscured by liver spots and age. It was a set of coordinates and a small symbol that she'd only seen once before, in a photo her father had shown her and then made her swear never to mention. "Sir," she said calmly, stepping closer while security regrouped behind her, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "Sarah, get back from him!" Dr. Reeves commanded. She ignored him and spoke 5 words that she'd learned from her father, words in a language that technically didn't exist in any official military database. A pidgin mix of Vietnamese, French, and English that only one classified unit had used during operations that were never officially acknowledged. "Dong Doi, the mission is complete." The old man froze. His hands slowly lowered. The wild calculation in his eyes gave way to something that looked like shock, then an overwhelming exhaustion that seemed to age him another decade in seconds. "That code," he whispered, his voice cracking. "That code's been dead for 43 years. How do you—" "My father," Sarah said simply. "He told me stories." The room had gone silent except for the beeping of monitors and someone's labored breathing. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "Nurse Mitchell, what the hell do you think you're doing? We have protocols." "Your protocols," Sarah interrupted, her eyes never leaving the old man. "Don't account for soldiers who never came home." The patient's legs gave out. Sarah caught him before he hit the floor, feeling how little he weighed, how much of his frame was just bone and stubborn will. Up close, she could see the malnutrition, the infections, the untreated wounds. But she could also see the bullet wound in his left shoulder, partially concealed by his torn jacket. Fresh, maybe 3 days old, and definitely not self-inflicted. "Get a gurney," she ordered, "and someone call Dr. Patricia Wong. Tell her we have a special case." Dr. Reeves sputtered. "I'm the attending physician here, and You're ordering a 70-year-old combat veteran with active PTSD to be chemically restrained, which will likely cause him to code and die in the next 20 minutes. Sarah cut him off, her voice taking on the steel that came from too many years of watching young doctors make fatal mistakes. "Dr. Wong specializes in trauma psychology and has clearance for cases like this. Call her, now." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he grabbed his phone with shaking hands. Sarah helped ease the old man onto the gurney that Kelly had nervously wheeled over. His breathing was becoming more labored, and when she checked his vitals, her stomach dropped. Blood pressure was plummeting. The stress of the altercation had accelerated whatever was already killing him. "What's your name?" she asked as she started a new IV line with practiced efficiency. Daniel Cross." Each word seemed to cost him. "But that name's been dead almost as long as the code." "Well, Mr. Cross, that name's alive right now, and so are you, and I intend to keep it that way." She adjusted the flow rate and grabbed her stethoscope. "I need you to tell me about that bullet wound." His eyes darted to the door, then back to her face. "They found me 3 days ago. I thought I'd lost them in Portland, but—" He coughed and blood flecked his lips. "I kept moving, made it to Cedar Falls, collapsed in the park. Don't remember much after that." "Who found you?" "The people who want to make sure the truth stays buried." His hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "You need to get out of here. If they tracked me to the park, they'll track me here. You don't want to be anywhere near me when they arrive. Sarah had worked in emergency medicine long enough to recognize genuine fear when she saw it. This wasn't paranoia. This was the terror of someone who'd been running for a very long time and had finally run out of road. Dr. Wong arrived 15 minutes later, a slight woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Daniel, then at Sarah, and nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "Clear the room," Dr. Wong said quietly. "Everyone except Nurse Mitchell." Dr. Reeves opened his mouth to protest, but Dr. Wong fixed him with a stare that had made tougher men back down. "Dr. Reeves, this patient falls under federal medical protocols that supersede your authority. If you have questions, you can direct them to the hospital administrator in the morning. Until then, this is my case." The room emptied, leaving just the three of them and the steady beep of monitors. "Sarah," Dr. Wong said, using her first name in a way that immediately put her on alert, "I need you to tell me exactly what you said to him." Sarah repeated the phrase. "And Doctor," Wong's expression shifted into something that looked like grief. "Your father was Thomas Mitchell. Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, 5th Special Forces Group." It wasn't a question, so Sarah just nodded. "I treated 3 members of his unit when they finally made it back stateside in 1982. The things they'd seen, the things they'd done." Dr. Wong turned to Daniel. "And the things that were done to them. Mr. Cross, I'm guessing you were part of Operation Blackwater." Daniel's bitter laugh turned into another coughing fit. "Operation Blackwater never existed, remember? Just like the 600 civilians we rescued from that camp never existed. Just like the 3 CIA contractors who sold us out to save their own asses never existed. And just like the proof you've been carrying for 43 years, Sarah said softly, noting the way his hand immediately moved to his jacket pocket, doesn't exist." Daniel stared at her, and in that moment she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The weighing of risks, the assessment of trust, the desperate mathematics of a man who'd spent decades with a secret that could destroy powerful people. "There's a flash drive," he finally whispered, "sewn into the lining of my jacket. Everything's on there. Names, dates, coordinates, bank accounts. Proof of what they did to us and proof of what we found. I've been trying to get it to someone who could do something with it for years, but everyone I approached either died or disappeared or told me to shut up and take the veterans' pension they offered." Sarah carefully removed his jacket, feeling along the lining until her fingers found the slight irregularity. She pulled out a small medical blade and carefully opened the seam. The flash drive was wrapped in layers of plastic, protected from water and wear. "The bullet wound," Dr. Wong said, already examining it with gloved hands. "This was a professional hit, close range, silenced weapon based on the powder burns. You should be dead. I saw the shooter's reflection in a car window, moved at the last second, still caught me, but not where he was aiming." Daniel's voice was getting weaker. "I knew I couldn't go to the police. They have people everywhere, so I just kept moving. Thought if I could make it to Canada, maybe I could find someone there who'd listen." "Cedar Falls is the opposite direction of Canada," Sarah pointed out. "I was delirious, fevered. I think I was trying to get to Seattle, to the federal building there, but I got on the wrong bus." He closed his eyes. "Story of my fucking life. Always one step behind, always in the wrong place." "You're in exactly the right place," Dr. Wong said firmly, as she worked on cleaning and properly dressing his wound. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me. In my office, there's a red folder in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. The drawer is locked. The key is taped under the left side of my desk. Bring me that folder and don't let anyone see you doing it." Sarah understood. Whatever was in that folder, it wasn't standard medical protocol. She slipped out of the trauma bay and made her way through the quiet hospital corridors, hyper-aware of every shadow, every unfamiliar face. Dr. Wong's office was on the 3rd floor, away from the main hospital traffic. Sarah found the key exactly where she'd said it would be and retrieved the folder. Inside were contact numbers, official-looking documents with government seals, and a set of instructions for what to do if a patient arrived claiming to have information about classified military operations. When she returned to the trauma bay, Dr. Wong was finishing up with Daniel's wound care. The old soldier looked more alert now, though his color was still terrible, and his breathing remained labored. "I've called someone," Dr. Wong said as Sarah handed her the folder. An old friend who works in military justice. He's based in Fort Lewis, about an hour from here. He's one of the few people I trust with something like this. She checked her watch. He should arrive by dawn. That's too long, Daniel said. They'll come before then. Who exactly is they? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. Marcus Hale. Used to be Captain Marcus Hale, our commanding officer. He was the one who sold us out. The camp we raided, it wasn't just holding civilians. It was a black site prison run by CIA contractors who were using it to interrogate and eliminate people who knew too much about certain operations. We weren't supposed to find it, and when we did, we weren't supposed to survive long enough to tell anyone. Daniel's hands were shaking now. Hale got promoted, got rich, got powerful. Last I heard, he was CEO of some defense contractor, pulling down 8 figures a year consulting for the Pentagon. And all it cost him was the lives of 19 good soldiers. But you survived, Dr. Wong said. 4 of us did. Made it out of that jungle alive. We had proof, documents we stole from the camp, recordings, photographs. We thought if we could just get home, we could expose what happened. His laugh was bitter. First one died in a car accident 2 months after we got stateside. Second one overdosed on heroin he never used. Third one shot himself supposedly, though he was right-handed and the gun was in his left hand. I went underground, changed my name, stayed moving, stayed alive. Until 3 days ago, Sarah said. I got sloppy, tired. I'm 73 years old and I've been running since I was 30. I just wanted it to be over. He looked at the flash drive in Sarah's hand. Everything Hale did is on there. Everything he became, everyone he hurt to keep his secret. Bank records showing payments to the families of soldiers who were supposed to have died in training accidents. Emails discussing how to discredit witnesses. Even a video confession from one of the CIA contractors before Hale had him killed. The door to the trauma bay opened and Sarah's entire body tensed, but it was just Kelly, looking nervous. Dr. Wong? There are some men in the lobby asking about a patient who was brought in from Morrison Park. They say they're federal agents, but they're not showing their badges to the front desk staff. Sarah and Dr. Wong exchanged looks. How many? Dr. Wong asked. 3. All in suits. One of them has been making calls and looking really agitated. Daniel tried to sit up. You have to get out of here, both of you. Take the drive and run. We're not leaving you, Sarah said firmly. She turned to Kelly. Tell security we're in lockdown protocol for a violent patient. No visitors, no exceptions. If those men try to come up here, security is to call the police. Kelly nodded and hurried out. Dr. Wong was already pulling up something on her tablet. I'm activating the Federal Patient Protection Protocol. It's designed for witnesses in protective custody, but it should buy us some time. The hospital will have to comply with proper federal warrants and procedures before allowing anyone access to Daniel. Hale won't bother with warrants, Daniel said. He'll just come in and finish the job. As if on cue, the lights in the trauma bay flickered. Once, twice, then the backup generators kicked in with a low hum. That's not normal, Sarah said, moving to the window. From the 3rd floor, she could see the hospital's main entrance. A black SUV had pulled up, and 4 more men in suits were climbing out. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover the exits. They've cut the power, Dr. Wong said, her voice tight. Sarah, take the flash drive. There's a service elevator at the end of the east wing that runs on a separate generator. Take it down to the basement, go through the maintenance tunnels. They lead to the old hospital building across the street. From there you can get out without being seen. I'm not leaving you here with him, Sarah protested. You're not leaving me, Daniel said. You're doing what soldiers have been doing since wars began. You're getting the intelligence back to command. That drive is worth more than my life. It's worth more than all of our lives. Sarah looked at the old man, at his fierce determination despite the pain and exhaustion. She thought about her father, who'd come home from Vietnam a different person, who'd drunk himself to death by the time she was 16 because of things he could never talk about. She thought about all the soldiers who'd been betrayed, discarded, erased. Give me 5 minutes, she said. I need to make copies. She ran to the nurse's station and grabbed 3 flash drives from the supply cabinet. In the tiny office behind the station, she used the computer to clone Daniel's drive onto all 3, her hand shaking so badly it took twice as long as it should have. She put 1 drive in her scrub pocket, 1 in her shoe, and one in the small bag she carried for her phone and keys. When she returned to the trauma bay, Dr. Wong had moved Daniel to a wheelchair and was preparing to move him. "There's a patient room on the 4th floor that's been closed for renovation," Dr. Wong explained. "It's not on any of the active room lists. We can hide him there while you get the evidence out." The hospital's PA system crackled to life. "Attention all staff, we are experiencing a temporary power issue. Please remain calm and stay with your patients. Security is investigating." "That's the signal," Daniel said. "They're making their move." Sarah helped Dr. Wong get Daniel into the wheelchair, carefully arranging the IV lines and monitor leads. They moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding the main hallways. Twice they had to duck into empty rooms as security guards rushed past, responding to calls about suspicious individuals in the building. They reached the closed patient room on the 4th floor without incident. Dr. Wong helped Daniel into the bed while Sarah reconnected his monitors to the portable units. "There's a phone on the wall," Dr. Wong said. "It's connected to an old landline system that's separate from the main hospital network. If something goes wrong, you can call out." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "I'm going back downstairs to run interference. I'll tell them the patient coded and died, that we've already moved the body to the morgue. It might buy you enough time." Dr. Wong gripped Sarah's shoulder. "My friend from Fort Lewis. His name is Colonel James Rivera. His number is in that red folder. Get the evidence to him. He's one of the good ones." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to find a way to protect both of them, but Daniel's hand on her wrist stopped her. "Go," he said simply. "Finish the mission." She nodded and slipped out of the room, the red folder tucked under her arm. The service elevator was at the end of a long corridor that smelled of disinfectant and age. She pressed the button and waited, every second feeling like an hour. The elevator doors opened with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. Sarah stepped inside and pressed the button for the basement level. The descent seemed to take forever. When the doors finally opened, she was greeted by the dim lighting and concrete walls of the hospital's lower level. The maintenance tunnels branched off in multiple directions, marked only by faded paint and ancient signage. She'd been down here once before, during a hospital-wide drill. She tried to remember which tunnel led to the old building, left or right. Behind her, she heard the stairwell door bang open. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast. Sarah went left, moving as quickly as she could while trying to keep her footsteps quiet. The tunnel stretched ahead of her, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls. The footsteps behind her were getting closer. She broke into a run, her sneakers slapping against the concrete. Ahead, she could see where the tunnel branched again. She took the right branch, hoping it would lead her toward the exit. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, some kind of old mechanical room filled with defunct equipment and years of accumulated debris. And there, on the far side, was a door marked with a faded exit sign. Sarah ran for it, her lungs burning. She was 5 feet away when a hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. The man facing her was in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished-looking in an expensive suit, but his eyes were cold, and the gun in his hand was very steady. "Nurse Mitchell," Marcus Hale said with a smile that didn't reach those dead eyes, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the flash drives hidden in her clothing, but Hale's gun tracked the motion with professional precision. "Don't," he said softly. "I've killed better people for less. You're just a nurse who made a very poor decision tonight." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to keep her breathing steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 12 years in emergency medicine had taught her how to function under pressure, how to think clearly when everything was falling apart. "You're Marcus Hale," she said, buying time while her mind raced through options. "CEO of Sentinel Defense Solutions. You were on the cover of Defense Quarterly last month. Something about a new contract with the Pentagon." His smile widened fractionally. "You've done your homework. Did Daniel tell you about our history together?" "He told me enough." "I doubt that. Daniel always did have a flair for the dramatic, but he never understood the bigger picture." Hale gestured with the gun toward the folder under her arm. "That drive's in your pocket, your shoe, and your bag. All of them. Slowly." Sarah's stomach dropped. He'd been watching, or he had people who'd been watching. He knew exactly what she'd done with the copies. You kill me, you'll have every cop in Cedar Falls looking for you, she said, though her voice wasn't quite as steady as she wanted it to be. Will they? A nurse attacked by a violent homeless patient she was treating? Happens more often than you'd think. My people are very good at making things look like tragic accidents. He took a step closer. Or you could hand over the drives, walk away, and pretend this never happened. Go back to your normal life. Forget you ever met Daniel Cross. The way you forgot about the 19 soldiers you left to die? Something flickered across Hale's face. Not guilt, but irritation at being reminded of an inconvenient truth. Those men died serving their country. Their sacrifice prevented a diplomatic incident that could have destabilized an entire region. I made the hard choice that soft men like Daniel could never understand. His gun hand remained perfectly steady. Last chance, Nurse Mitchell. The drives. Now. Sarah's mind was working through probabilities and outcomes. If she gave him the drives, she was dead. He couldn't afford to leave her alive. If she refused, she was dead. But if she could stall him long enough for someone to notice, if she could get a message out somehow. The lights in the mechanical room flickered and died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in after 3 seconds of total darkness, bathing everything in dim red. Hale didn't flinch or look around. He'd been expecting this, which meant he had people controlling the hospital's systems. My team is very thorough, he said. Right now they're erasing every digital record of Daniel Cross's admission to this hospital. Security footage, medical records, even the ambulance call logs. By morning there will be no proof he was ever here. Except for Dr. Wong, the paramedics, the security guards who fought with him. Dr. Wong will be retiring very suddenly due to health concerns. The paramedics will discover their records were corrupted by a computer virus. The security guards will remember a confused homeless man who became violent, then died. Memory is a funny thing. People remember what makes sense to them, and what makes sense is usually whatever story has the most institutional support behind it. Sarah's hand twitched toward her pocket again, and this time Hale's patience ran out. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides and pressed the gun against her ribs. I've been doing this for 43 years, he said, his breath hot against her ear. I've disappeared entire villages. You think one nurse and one dying old man present any kind of challenge? But Sarah had learned something from her father, from the late-night stories he'd told when the alcohol had loosened his tongue enough to let the truth slip out. She'd learned that the most dangerous people were the ones who underestimated the quiet ones, the ones who did their jobs without seeking glory, the ones who understood that sometimes survival meant being smart instead of being brave. Her right hand was empty, pressed against her side. But her left hand, the one Hale couldn't see, had been slowly working one of the flash drives out of her scrub pocket. You're right, she said, forcing defeat into her voice. I'm just a nurse. This is way over my head. I'll give you the drives. She felt him relax fractionally, felt the gun barrel ease back just slightly from her ribs. That's when she dropped the flash drive down the drainage grate at her feet. Hale's eyes flicked down for just a fraction of a second, and Sarah drove her elbow back into his solar plexus with every ounce of strength she had. He grunted and stumbled back, and she ran. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash lighting up the mechanical room like a strobe. Sarah felt the bullet pass close enough to stir her hair, and then she was through the door marked exit and into another tunnel, this one even darker than the first. Behind her, she heard Hale shouting into a radio. Target is mobile in the maintenance tunnels, basement level. Lock down all exits. I want her alive until we recover all the drives. Sarah ran blindly, one hand trailing along the wall to keep her oriented. The tunnel curved to the left, then branched into 3 directions. She chose the middle path because it angled upward, hoping it would lead to ground level. Her lungs were burning and her legs felt like rubber, but she kept moving. She could hear footsteps echoing through the tunnels behind her, multiple sets now, coming from different directions. Hale had backup, and they were coordinating to trap her. The tunnel opened into what looked like an old storage area filled with rusty medical equipment from decades past. Sarah ducked behind a stack of ancient hospital beds and tried to catch her breath while she assessed her options. She still had 2 flash drives, one in her shoe, one in her bag. The folder with Dr. Wong's contact information was somehow still clutched under her arm. She needed to get a message out, needed to contact Colonel Rivera at Fort Lewis. There was a payphone on the far wall, probably disconnected, but worth trying. She started to move toward it when she heard voices in the tunnel behind her. She came this way. Blood trail. Sarah looked down and saw the dark spots on the concrete. She pressed her hand to her side and felt wetness. The bullet had grazed her after all, carving a shallow furrow along her ribs. She hadn't even felt it in the adrenaline rush. She tore a strip from her scrub top and pressed it against the wound, then moved as quietly as possible toward the payphone. The footsteps were getting closer. 20 feet. 15. The phone was dead, the line cut, or simply rotted away over the years. Sarah bit back a curse and looked around for another option. There. A maintenance ladder leading up to what looked like a ceiling hatch. She grabbed the ladder and started climbing, each movement sending pain lancing through her injured side. The hatch was heavy and corroded, but she managed to push it open with her shoulder. She pulled herself through into a narrow crawl space filled with pipes and electrical conduits. Below, she heard someone enter the storage area. Anything? Blood trail ends at that old phone. She's close. Sarah crawled forward through the tight space, biting her lip to keep from making any sound. The crawl space seemed to run parallel to the tunnel system below, and after about 30 feet it opened into a larger access space where several pipes converged. She could see dim light filtering through a ventilation grate ahead. She moved toward it and found herself looking down into what appeared to be the hospital's main laundry facility. The room was empty, the industrial washers silent at this hour. Sarah kicked at the grate until it came loose, then lowered herself down into the laundry room. Her side was bleeding more freely now, and she was starting to feel lightheaded. She needed to stop the bleeding, needed to get somewhere safe. But first, she needed to make sure the evidence survived even if she didn't. She found a laundry cart filled with clean linens and dug through until she found a pillowcase. She pulled the flash drive from her shoe and wrapped it carefully, then wrote a note on the back of a laundry slip with a pen from her pocket. Evidence of war crimes. Get to Colonel James Rivera, Fort Lewis. Lives depend on it. She buried the wrapped drive deep in the center of the laundry pile. The carts were picked up every morning at 6 and delivered to different floors throughout the hospital. Even if Hale's people found it, they'd have to search every piece of linen in the building. Sarah kept the second drive in her bag. If she was caught, she'd make sure Hale thought he'd recovered everything. It might buy the other drive enough time to be found. The laundry room door opened without warning. Sarah dropped behind one of the industrial washers as two men in dark suits entered. They weren't searching carefully. They were moving with the confidence of people who believed their target was cornered. "Ground floor is locked down," one of them said into a radio. "Checking the service areas now." Sarah waited until they'd moved to the far side of the room, then slipped out the door they'd left open. She found herself in a service corridor she recognized. This was the ground floor of the main hospital building, near the emergency department loading dock. The loading dock would be monitored, but there was a small office adjacent to it where the shipping and receiving supervisor worked during business hours. Sarah had delivered paperwork there before. She knew it had a computer with network access. She made her way carefully down the corridor, staying close to the walls and ducking into doorways whenever she heard footsteps. The shipping office door was locked, but the lock was flimsy. Sarah grabbed a fire extinguisher from its wall mount and smashed the door handle. The noise seemed catastrophically loud, but the door opened. The office was cramped and smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. Sarah locked the broken door behind her and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. Then she sat down at the computer and powered it on, her hands shaking badly now from blood loss and shock. The computer seemed to take forever to boot up. Sarah pressed harder against the wound in her side, trying to slow the bleeding. She was leaving bloody handprints on everything she touched. Finally, the login screen appeared. She tried the default password that most hospital departments used and got lucky. Whoever worked this office hadn't bothered to change it. She opened the web browser and pulled up a free email service, creating a new account with random numbers. Then she pulled out Dr. Wong's folder and found Colonel Rivera's contact information. The email she typed was brief and direct. Evidence of Operation Blackwater war crimes attached. Daniel Cross wounded at Mercy Point General, Cedar Falls, Washington. Marcus Hale, CEO Sentinel Defense Solutions, attempting to eliminate witnesses. Backup evidence in hospital laundry system. Send help immediately. Nurse Sarah Mitchell. She pulled the flash drive from her bag and attached every file to the email. The upload bar crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. 5%, 10%. Someone tried the door handle. When it didn't open, they started kicking it. 20%. 25. The chair under the door handle splintered. The door burst inward and 3 men poured through, weapons drawn. 50%. 60. Step away from the computer, the lead man ordered. Sarah's finger hovered over the delete key, ready to destroy the unsent email if they tried to stop her. You shoot me, my hand spasms, and everything gets erased. You really want to take that risk? The men exchanged glances. One of them spoke into his radio. We have her. Shipping office, ground floor. She's at a computer. 75%, 80. Marcus Hale walked through the broken door a minute later, looking mildly annoyed but not particularly concerned. His suit was still immaculate despite the chase through the tunnels. Clever, he said, looking at the upload bar, but pointless. Do you really think one email to one military officer is going to change anything? I think it's more than you had to worry about an hour ago, Sarah said. 90%, 95. Hale pulled out his phone and made a call. I need a priority intercept on all outgoing communications from Mercy Point General Hospital. Yes, all of them. I don't care what it costs. 100% upload complete. Sarah hit send and watched the confirmation message appear on screen. Then she stood up, swaying slightly from blood loss, and faced Hale directly. It's done. Every document, every photograph, every bank record, all of it is in the hands of military justice. You can kill me. You can kill Daniel, but you can't stop what's coming. Hale's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You have no idea what you've done. The things in those files, they don't just implicate me. They implicate senators, generals, CIA directors, people who have the power to make entire investigations disappear. Maybe, Sarah said, or maybe they'll decide you're not worth protecting anymore. Maybe you've become more of a liability than an asset. For the first time, she saw genuine anger cross Hale's face. He took a step toward her, and she forced herself not to back away. Sir? One of his men was holding up his phone. We have a problem. Federal agents just arrived at the main entrance. Real ones. They're asking about a patient named Daniel Cross, and they have a warrant. Hale's jaw tightened. How many? 6. All armed. They've presented credentials and they're demanding access to hospital records immediately. Sarah felt a surge of hope. The email had worked faster than she'd expected, or maybe Dr. Wong had managed to get word out somehow. Either way, help had arrived. But Hale wasn't panicking. Instead, he was smiling, and that scared Sarah more than the gun had. Tell our people to cooperate fully with the federal agents, Hale said calmly. Give them everything they ask for, and prepare a medical transport for the patient in room 417. We're moving him under the federal protection protocols. Sarah's blood ran cold. You're going to take him? Those federal agents are going to discover that Daniel Cross is a valuable witness who requires immediate protection and medical treatment at a secure facility. They'll escort him out of here themselves, with full legal authority. Hale's smile widened. And somewhere between here and that secure facility, there will be a terrible accident. You see, I don't need to fight the system when I can simply use it. They'll know it was you. Will they? Accidents happen during prisoner transfers all the time, especially when the prisoner is elderly, unstable, and has a history of violence. He gestured to his men. Take her upstairs. We're going to wait this out together. Make sure she doesn't cause any more problems. 2 of the men grabbed Sarah's arms. She tried to fight, but blood loss and exhaustion had stolen her strength. They half dragged, half carried her out of the shipping office and toward the service elevator. As they moved through the corridors, Sarah caught glimpses of the organized chaos Hale had orchestrated. Security guards were being briefed by men in expensive suits. Hospital administrators were gathered in worried clusters, talking in hushed voices. Everything was being managed, controlled, shaped into a narrative that would serve Hale's purposes. They took her to a small conference room on the 4th floor, not far from where they'd hidden Daniel. One of the men zip-tied her hands to a radiator, while another stood guard at the door. Hale sat down across from her, looking completely relaxed. You should have taken my offer in the tunnels, he said. Walk away. Forget everything. Live your life. Now, you're just another loose end that needs tying up. You're going to kill everyone who knows the truth? I'm going to do what I've always done. Whatever is necessary to protect American interests. That's not murder, Nurse Mitchell. That's patriotism. Sarah laughed, which hurt her injured ribs. You keep telling yourself that. But we both know you did this for money and power, not for your country. The two aren't mutually exclusive. A strong defense industry makes America strong. The contracts I've secured have kept thousands of people employed, have funded research that saves lives. What's the death of a few soldiers compared to that? They knew the risks when they enlisted. They didn't know the risk was you. Hale stood and walked to the window, looking down at the hospital parking lot where federal vehicles were pulling up. Do you know what Daniel's real crime was? It wasn't discovering that black site prison. It wasn't even trying to expose what happened there. His crime was being stupid enough to think that truth matters more than order. The world doesn't run on truth, Nurse Mitchell. It runs on stories, and the most powerful people are the ones who get to decide which stories are told. From somewhere in the building, Sarah heard raised voices. An alarm started blaring, the kind used for fire drills or evacuations. Hale's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression darkened. What do you mean he's gone? Hale's voice was low and dangerous. I ordered that room locked down. Sarah felt a wild surge of hope. Daniel had escaped somehow, or maybe Dr. Wong had moved him again. Either way, Hale's careful plan was falling apart. Find him, Hale snapped into the phone. Search every room on that floor. He can't have gone far in his condition. He ended the call and turned to Sarah. Where did Dr. Wong take him? I don't know. Wrong answer. Hale pulled out his gun and pressed it against her knee. I can make you scream loud enough that the entire hospital hears it, but no one's going to come save you. They're all too busy dealing with the chaos my people have created. Last chance. Where is Daniel Cross? Sarah met his eyes and saw something she recognized from years of dealing with violent patients in the emergency room. Hale was losing control, making mistakes, letting emotion override his careful planning. Desperate people did desperate things, and that made them dangerous but also predictable. Even if I knew, she said, I wouldn't tell you. Because unlike you, I understand what honor actually means. Hale's finger tightened on the trigger and Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about her father, about Daniel, about all the soldiers who'd been betrayed and forgotten. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Sarah's eyes snapped open to see a figure in tactical gear rappelling through the broken window. More figures appeared in the doorway, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The guard who'd been watching the door went down hard, tackled by two men in FBI windbreakers. Hale spun toward the window, bringing his gun up, but the tactical operator was faster. A single shot took Hale in the shoulder, spinning him around. His weapon clattered to the floor. Marcus Hale, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, a voice said from the doorway. Sarah looked up and saw a man in his 50s wearing a colonel's uniform. He had kind eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd seen combat. Colonel Rivera? She managed to say. He nodded and moved quickly to cut her zip ties with a tactical knife. We got your email 15 minutes ago. Dr. Wong had already called me, but your evidence gave us everything we needed for immediate warrants. He helped her to her feet. We've secured the hospital. Daniel Cross is safe. Dr. Wong moved him to an actual secure facility while Hale's people were chasing you through the tunnels. Sarah felt her legs give out. Rivera caught her and eased her into a chair. You're bleeding, he said, noting the wound in her side. Medic! I'm fine, Sarah said, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. The evidence, did you get all of it? Every file on that drive. We've already started making arrests. 3 senators, a deputy director at the CIA, 4 defense contractors. This is going to shake things up all the way to the Pentagon. Rivera's expression was grim. It's going to be ugly, but it's necessary. Sarah watched as FBI agents handcuffed Hale and read him his rights. His shoulder was bleeding, but his face showed no pain, just a cold fury that made her shiver. As they led him toward the door, Hale stopped and looked back at Sarah. This won't end the way you think it will, he said quietly. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who've gotten away with worse. Friends in very high places. Maybe, Sarah said, but now you have something you didn't have before. Witnesses who aren't afraid anymore. And evidence that can't be disappeared or discredited. You spent 43 years running from the truth, and tonight it finally caught up with you. Hale's eyes narrowed. But before he could respond, the agents pulled him through the doorway and he was gone. A paramedic was examining Sarah's wound, cleaning and dressing it with practiced efficiency. Rivera stood nearby, making calls and coordinating with his people. Through the broken window, Sarah could see dawn breaking over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Daniel?" she asked the colonel when he finished his call. "Where is he exactly?" Rivera hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Come on, I'll take you to him." They went down to the second floor, where a wing of private rooms had been cordoned off by military police. Rivera led her to the last room on the right and knocked softly before opening the door. Daniel was in bed, hooked up to proper monitors and IVs, looking cleaner and more cared for than he had in the trauma bay. Dr. Wong sat in a chair beside him, her expression weary but satisfied. When Daniel saw Sarah, his eyes filled with tears. "You did it," he said, his voice breaking. "You actually did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected, moving to his bedside. "You carried the evidence for 43 years. I just made sure it got to the right people." 19 good soldiers, Daniel whispered. 19 men who deserved better than what they got. Maybe now they'll finally get some justice." Dr. Wong stood and put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You should rest. You've lost blood, and you're going into shock." "In a minute," Sarah said. She looked at Daniel, at the old soldier who'd survived against impossible odds. "Your mission is complete, Mr. Cross. You can stand down now." Daniel's laugh turned into a sob, and then he was crying openly, decades of pain and loss and guilt finally finding release. Sarah held his hand and let him cry, understanding that some wounds ran too deep for medicine to heal, but that acknowledgement and truth could at least begin the process. Colonel Rivera stepped into the hallway and made another call. Sarah could hear fragments of his conversation through the open door. Yes, sir, we have everything. Multiple high-value targets in custody. The nurse's testimony will be crucial. Recommend immediate witness protection." For the witness protection. Sarah hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered what came after the adrenaline and fear faded. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But when she looked at Daniel, at the peace finally settling over his weathered face, she knew it had been worth it. Dr. Wong pulled Sarah gently toward the door. "Let him rest. You need treatment, and we need to debrief you before the lawyers descend." Sarah nodded and let herself be led from the room. As they walked down the corridor, she saw federal agents everywhere, securing evidence, interviewing staff, transforming the hospital into a crime scene. "How did you know to call Colonel Rivera?" Sarah asked. Dr. Wong smiled sadly. "Because 30 years ago, when 3 traumatized soldiers arrived at my hospital with a story nobody wanted to believe, I didn't call anyone. I let myself be convinced that it was better to let sleeping dogs lie, that these men needed to move on and heal rather than fight battles they couldn't win. I've regretted that decision every day since." She paused at the elevator. "When Daniel Cross showed up tonight, I swore I wouldn't make the same mistake twice." The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. As they descended toward the emergency department where Sarah would receive proper treatment, she thought about the chain of choices that had led to this moment. Her father teaching her that secret phrase, Daniel refusing to give up despite decades of running, Dr. Wong making a different choice than she'd made 30 years ago. Sarah herself deciding to trust her instincts instead of following protocol. The elevator doors opened onto chaos. The emergency department was packed with federal agents, hospital administrators, and media crews who'd somehow gotten wind that something major was happening. Camera lights blazed and reporters shouted questions that Sarah couldn't quite process through the fog of exhaustion and blood loss. Colonel Rivera appeared at her elbow, running interference. "No comments at this time. The investigation is ongoing. Please clear a path." They made it to a treatment room and Rivera posted guards outside while a doctor Sarah didn't recognize began working on her injuries. The wound was worse than the paramedics' field dressing had suggested. She'd need stitches and antibiotics and probably a tetanus shot. As the doctor worked, Rivera pulled up a chair beside the examination table. "I need to ask you some questions while everything's fresh in your mind," he said gently. "Can you tell me exactly what happened from the moment Daniel Cross arrived at this hospital?" Sarah told him everything. from the initial violent episode to the secret phrase to the chase through the maintenance tunnels. She described Marcus Hale's confession, his plan to use the federal transport as cover for eliminating Daniel, his complete lack of remorse. Rivera recorded everything on his phone, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, he sat back and shook his head in what looked like wonder. You understand that what you did tonight was incredibly dangerous and probably violated about a dozen hospital protocols. Yes, sir? And you understand that you're going to be subpoenaed to testify in multiple trials, that your life is going to be dissected by defense lawyers trying to discredit you, that this is going to consume years of your life? I understand. Rivera studied her face for a long moment. Why did you do it? You could have just followed orders, sedated Daniel, let the system handle things the way it always does. You could have walked away. Sarah thought about her father's haunted eyes, about the nightmares that had stolen his peace until alcohol finally stole his life. She thought about Daniel's desperate warning that they were coming, about 19 soldiers who died believing their own command had betrayed them. Because somebody had to, she said simply. And I was there. Rivera nodded slowly. Your father would be proud. The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Not yet. Not while there was still work to be done. The doctor finished stitching her wound and gave her a prescription for antibiotics and pain medication. Rivera helped her to her feet and guided her to a quieter room where she could rest while the initial chaos settled. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we start the real work. Depositions, briefings, coordination with multiple agencies. This investigation is going to be massive, and you're going to be at the center of it. Sarah lay back on the hospital bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Every muscle ached, her side throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, and her hands were shaking from the after-effects of adrenaline. But as she closed her eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not quite peace, not yet, but something close to it. The sense that she'd done something that mattered, that couldn't be undone or dismissed or forgotten. In a room 2 floors above her, Daniel Cross was finally sleeping without nightmares for the first time in 4 decades. In a federal holding cell downtown, Marcus Hale was discovering that the lawyers and friends he'd counted on were suddenly very difficult to reach. And in offices scattered across Washington, D.C., powerful people were receiving phone calls that would end careers, destroy reputations, and expose secrets they'd thought safely buried. The sun was fully up now, flooding Sarah's room with clean morning light. Through the window, she could see Cedar Falls waking up to a day that looked like any other day, with no idea that everything had just changed. Sarah's last thought before exhaustion pulled her under was that somewhere in the hospital's laundry system, wrapped in a pillowcase with a handwritten note, there was one more copy of the evidence. Insurance, in case anything went wrong with the email, in case powerful people tried to make the truth disappear one more time. But as her consciousness faded into dreamless sleep, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room. They stopped at her door, and she heard the quiet beep of a security badge accessing the lock. Sarah's eyes snapped open at the sound of the door closing. Her hand instinctively reached for the call button, but a familiar voice stopped her. It's just me, Dr. Wong said, moving into the dim room. I needed to check on you without half the FBI listening in. Sarah's heart rate slowed marginally. What's wrong? Dr. Wong pulled a chair close to the bed and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Rivera is a good man, but he's military. He sees this through the lens of justice and accountability. I've been doing this longer than he has, and I know how these things really work. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a news alert. This went live 10 minutes ago. The headline read, Federal investigation into defense contractor raises national security concerns. Sources say evidence may be compromised. Sarah sat up too quickly, her stitches pulling. That's impossible. We sent everything. They have Daniel's testimony. They're already starting the counterattack. Look at the source. Dr. Wong scrolled down. Anonymous Pentagon officials expressing concern that the evidence was obtained through illegal means. Questions about chain of custody. Suggestions that Daniel Cross is mentally unstable and his claims are unreliable. We have bank records, transaction logs, everything Hale said to me in that shipping office. Your word against his. You're a trauma nurse who violated hospital protocol and assaulted federal property by breaking into that office. Hale's lawyers are going to tear you apart on the stand." Dr. Wong's expression was grim. "And they're going to argue that Daniel's mental state makes him an unreliable witness. They'll bring in psychiatrists who'll testify that his PTSD created false memories, that he's delusional." Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. "The evidence is real. The files are authentic. Evidence can be questioned. Experts can be bought. I've seen it happen before. Cases that should have been slam dunks fall apart because the defendants have enough money and influence to create reasonable doubt." Dr. Wong leaned closer. "There's something else. 2 of the senators who were supposed to be arrested this morning, they claim they were never involved in Operation Blackwater. They're saying the bank records were fabricated, that someone hacked their accounts to frame them. That's insane. That's damage control, and it's working. The media is already running with the story that this might be a sophisticated hoax designed to undermine confidence in the defense industry." Dr. Wong pulled up another article. "This one suggests foreign intelligence services might be behind it." Sarah wanted to throw something, to scream, to make someone understand that the truth was right there in front of them. But 12 years in emergency medicine had taught her that wanting something didn't make it real, that the world was full of injustices that never got corrected. So what do? We make sure the evidence is absolutely bulletproof, which means we need that third flash drive, the one you dropped in the drainage grate. Dr. Wong stood. "If we can show an unbroken chain of custody for at least one copy, if we can prove that the files were secured before Hale's people could tamper with anything, it makes their conspiracy theory fall apart." Sarah swung her legs out of bed, ignoring the pain in her side. "The maintenance tunnels. I know exactly where I dropped it. You're in no condition. I'm the only one who knows the exact location, and if Hale's lawyers are already building their defense, we don't have time to waste." Sarah grabbed the scrubs someone had left folded on a chair. "Besides, I'm a nurse. I know my own limitations." "Doctor." Wong looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded. "I'll get you out of here without the FBI noticing. But Sarah, if we get caught doing this, we could both be charged with evidence tampering." "Then we don't get caught." 5 minutes later, Sarah was dressed and moving through the hospital corridors with Dr. Wong running interference. The FBI had concentrated their presence near Daniel's room and the main investigation areas, leaving gaps in their coverage that someone with Dr. Wong's institutional knowledge could exploit. They took a service stairwell down to the basement level. Sarah's stitches pulled with each step, and she could feel fresh blood seeping through the bandage, but she kept moving. The maintenance tunnel entrance was exactly where she remembered it, marked with faded warning signs about authorized personnel only. "Doctor." Wong produced a key card that shouldn't have worked on a lock this old, but apparently maintenance security hadn't been updated in decades. The door opened with a metallic groan. "Stay close," Sarah said, leading the way into the dimly lit tunnel. The drainage grate should be about 200 feet ahead, near where the tunnel branches. They moved quickly through the concrete corridor, their footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. Sarah tried to remember the exact sequence of turns she'd taken during her escape, tried to visualize where she'd been standing when she'd dropped the drive. The tunnel branched into 3 directions, just as she remembered. The middle path, the one she'd taken. She moved about 50 feet down it and started scanning the floor for the drainage grate. "There," Dr. Wong said, pointing to a rectangular metal grate set into the concrete. Sarah knelt beside it, her fingers finding the edges. The grate was heavy, but came up with effort. Below was a shallow drainage channel, maybe 2 feet deep, designed to handle water runoff from the maintenance systems. And there, caught against a rusted bracket, was the flash drive still in its pillowcase wrapper. Sarah reached down and grabbed it, relief flooding through her. The drive appeared undamaged, the wrapper still intact. She pulled it out and showed it to Dr. Wong. "We need to document this," Dr. Wong said, pulling out her phone. "Time, location, condition of the evidence. Create our own chain of custody." She took several photos of the drive, the location, Sarah holding it. Then she opened a voice memo app and began recording a detailed description of the recovery process, including timestamps and exact coordinates within the hospital. That's when Sarah heard voices echoing through the tunnels behind them. Checking the maintenance level now. If Mitchell was bleeding as badly as the crime scene suggests, she might have hidden evidence down here. Sarah recognized the voice. It was one of Hale's men, the one who'd been in the shipping office, which meant either he'd been released or he'd never been arrested at all. Dr. Wong's eyes widened. She grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her deeper into the tunnel, away from the voices. They moved as quickly and quietly as possible, but Sarah's injured side was slowing her down. The tunnel curved to the left and opened into another mechanical room, this one filled with the hospital's old heating system. Massive boilers loomed in the darkness, their surfaces covered in decades of dust and grime. "We're trapped," Sarah whispered. "There's only one way out." Dr. Wong was already scanning the room. "There. See that ventilation shaft? It should connect to the hospital's main air circulation system. We can climb up and access the building from inside." The shaft was about 8 feet off the ground, accessible only by climbing the exterior of one of the boilers. Sarah looked at the rusted metal, at the precarious handholds, and felt her stomach drop. "I can't climb that with this injury." "You have to, because if Hale's people find us with that drive, they'll kill us both and destroy the evidence." Dr. Wong was already moving toward the boiler. "I'll go first, then help pull you up." The voices were getting closer. Sarah could hear footsteps, multiple sets, coordinating their search pattern. They had maybe a minute before being discovered. Dr. Wong climbed the boiler with surprising agility for someone in her 60s, finding handholds and footholds that Sarah wouldn't have seen. She reached the ventilation shaft and kicked the cover loose, then disappeared inside. Sarah grabbed the boiler and started climbing. Each movement sent pain lancing through her side. She could feel her stitches tearing, could feel warm blood spreading across her scrubs. Her hands slipped on the dusty metal and she nearly fell, catching herself at the last second. "Come on," Dr. Wong whispered from above, reaching down. "Just a little further." Sarah forced herself up another foot, then another. Her vision was starting to blur from blood loss and pain. She reached up and felt Dr. Wong's hands grasp her wrists, pulling her the final distance into the ventilation shaft. They crawled through the narrow space just as lights appeared in the mechanical room below. Sarah pressed her face against the metal duct and tried to breathe quietly despite her racing heart. "Blood trail leads here but stops," one of the men said. "They must have gone up somehow." "Check those boilers and get someone to review the security footage for this area." Sarah and Dr. Wong crawled deeper into the ventilation system, moving as quietly as possible. The shaft ran horizontally for about 30 feet, then angled upward at a steep incline. Sarah's arms were shaking from exertion and blood loss, but she kept moving. The shaft eventually opened into a larger junction where multiple ducts converged. Dr. Wong kicked through another vent cover and they emerged into what appeared to be a storage closet on the 3rd floor. Sarah collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Her scrubs were soaked with blood from the torn stitches, and she felt dangerously lightheaded. Dr. Wong pulled out her phone and made a call. "Colonel Rivera? We have a situation. Some of Hale's people are still active in the hospital, and they're hunting for Sarah. We need immediate extraction." She listened for a moment. "3rd floor, storage closet 3B. And Colonel? We recovered additional evidence that proves chain of custody, but we need to secure it immediately before—" The storage closet door burst open. 2 men in dark suits entered, and Sarah recognized them both from the shipping office confrontation. They should have been in federal custody, but somehow they were here, armed, and very angry. "Give us the drive," the first man said, pulling out a weapon that looked more like military hardware than anything security personnel should carry. Dr. Wong stepped in front of Sarah. "You shoot us in a hospital room, you'll have the entire FBI on you in seconds." "The FBI is busy processing the prisoners from earlier, and this wing is closed for renovation. No cameras, no witnesses." The man's finger moved to the trigger. "Last chance." Sarah's hand closed around a metal shelf bracket that had come loose from the wall. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all she had. She tried to calculate angles and distances, tried to figure out if she had enough strength left for one more fight. The window behind them exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the room as a repelling line dropped through, followed immediately by a tactical operator in full gear. 2 more came through the door, moving with the fluid precision of special operations personnel. "Weapons down. Now!" The confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds. Hale's men were disarmed and forced to the ground before they could react. Colonel Rivera appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled fury. "I thought I made it clear that this hospital was a secured federal crime scene," he said, looking at the two men on the floor. "Either you're incredibly stupid or you're working for someone who believes they're above federal authority." One of the men smiled. "We were released on our own recognizance. Our lawyers argued insufficient evidence for detention. We have every right to be here." "You have the right to remain silent," Rivera said flatly. "And this time you're being charged with attempted murder of a federal witness, obstruction of justice, and criminal trespass on a secured crime scene. Your lawyers can argue about that from the outside." As his team secured the prisoners, Rivera turned to Sarah and Dr. Wong. His eyes widened when he saw the blood covering Sarah's scrubs. "Get a medic up here immediately," he ordered. Then more gently, "You were supposed to be resting." "We recovered this," Dr. Wong said, holding up the flash drive, "from a drainage grate in the maintenance tunnels where Sarah hid it during her escape. We have photographic evidence of the recovery, voice recordings documenting chain of custody, and time-stamped proof that it was secured before any of Hale's people could access it." Rivera took the drive carefully, handling it like the explosive evidence it represented. "This is good work, but you both took unnecessary risks." "Necessary risks," Sarah corrected, then her legs gave out. She woke up in a proper hospital bed, this time with actual medical equipment surrounding her, and a very annoyed surgeon standing at the foot of her bed. "You tore out 12 stitches, the surgeon said. "And you've lost enough blood that we're starting a transfusion. If you pull another stunt like that, I'm going to sedate you for your own safety." "Is the drive safe?" Sarah asked. Colonel Rivera stepped into view. "It's in federal custody and already being analyzed. Dr. Wong was right. Having an uncontaminated copy with documented chain of custody changes everything." Hale's lawyers were arguing that the email attachments could have been altered in transit, but this drive proves the files are authentic. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling some of the tension drain from her body. "Good. However," Rivera continued, "we have a bigger problem. 3 of Hale's key associates posted bail about an hour ago. The judge who granted it has connections to Sentinel Defense Solutions, connections we didn't know about until our background checks came back. And now those 3 associates have disappeared." Sarah's eyes opened again. "They're going to run. Worse. Intelligence suggests they're going to make one more attempt to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence before they flee the country. We've got Daniel under maximum security, and you're here under guard, but..." An explosion rocked the building. Not close, but powerful enough to rattle the windows and set off alarms throughout the hospital. Sarah tried to sit up, but the surgeon pushed her back down. "Stay in bed. That's an order." Rivera was already on his radio. "Report." "What was that?" "Explosion in the parking structure, level 3, right under the evidence processing van. The vehicle is destroyed and we have casualties." Sarah felt ice in her veins. "The flash drive was still with me," Rivera said, patting his jacket pocket. "They destroyed the wrong vehicle, but they're escalating rapidly." Another explosion, this one closer. The windows cracked but held, alarms wailed through the corridors, and Sarah could hear staff shouting, patients crying out in confusion and fear. Rivera's radio crackled with urgent voices overlapping each other. "Armed men entering from the east entrance. Shots fired on the 2nd floor. We need backup at the pool." The power died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in that familiar red glow. Through the window, Sarah could see smoke rising from multiple points in the parking structure. "They're not running," Sarah said. "They're trying to burn the whole thing down. If they can't stop the truth from coming out, they're going to create enough chaos that nobody knows what's true anymore." Rivera was coordinating with his people, but Sarah could hear the strain in his voice. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than the FBI team had prepared for. Dr. Wong appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Daniel's asking for you, both of you. He says it's urgent." "He should be evacuated," the surgeon protested. "He refuses to move until he talks to them." Dr. Wong looked at Rivera. "He says he knows why they're doing this. Says there's something on the drive we haven't found yet." Sarah disconnected herself from the transfusion line, ignoring the surgeon's protests. Rivera started to object, then seemed to realize there was no point. He helped her into a wheelchair, and they moved quickly through the chaotic corridors. Daniel's room was a fortress. Military police stood guard at every access point, and the windows had been reinforced with ballistic shields. Daniel himself looked worse than before. The stress of the attacks had taken a toll. "There's a second file," he said as soon as they entered. "Encrypted, hidden inside what looks like a corrupted data cluster on the drive. I set it up that way specifically because I knew if the main files were discovered, the people involved would try to destroy everything rather than let the second file come to light." Rivera pulled out the flash drive. "What's in it?" "Proof that Operation Blackwater wasn't a rescue mission gone wrong. It was a deliberate setup from the beginning." Daniel's hands were shaking. "The CIA wanted those prisoners eliminated. They were agency contractors who'd turned informant who were going to expose corruption and black site operations across Southeast Asia. The agency needed them dead, but couldn't risk doing it themselves. So they sent in a special forces unit," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "Told you it was a rescue mission, knowing the truth would come out when you got there. And when we survived, when we got the prisoners out alive and brought evidence of what we found, that's when Hale sold us out. He made a deal. Eliminate the witnesses, destroy the evidence, and in return he'd get promotions, contracts, access to the kind of power and money most soldiers can't imagine." Daniel coughed, and blood flecked his lips. The 19 men who died weren't just casualties of betrayal. They were murdered as part of a conspiracy that goes back 43 years and involves 3 presidential administrations. The room went silent except for the distant sounds of chaos in the hospital. Rivera's face had gone pale. "If this comes out, it won't just destroy careers. It'll shake public confidence in the entire military and intelligence apparatus." Which is exactly why Hale and his associates are willing to burn down a hospital full of innocent people to stop it, Dr. Wong said. "They're not just protecting themselves anymore. They're protecting an institutional secret." Another explosion, this one on the first floor from the sound of it. The building shook and pieces of ceiling tile rained down. Rivera was on his radio again. "How many hostiles do we have?" "At least 10 that we've confirmed. They're using military tactics and heavy weapons. We think they're trying to fight their way to the 4th floor." To Daniel's room, Sarah realized. They were going to eliminate the primary witness even if it meant a massacre. "We need to evacuate everyone," she said. "Patients, staff, everyone who's not essential to the investigation." "Already in progress," Rivera said. "But it's chaos down there. We have elderly patients who can't move quickly, surgical patients who can't be moved at all, and Hale's people are using the confusion to advance." Sarah looked at Daniel, at the old soldier who'd carried his burden for 4 decades. She thought about the nurses and doctors downstairs trying to protect their patients, while armed mercenaries hunted through the corridors. She thought about her father, about all the soldiers who'd been betrayed and forgotten. "We use ourselves as bait," she said. "Daniel and me. We move to a different location, make sure Hale's people know where we're going, draw them away from the evacuation routes." "Absolutely not," Rivera said. "You're both witnesses under federal protection." "And we're both going to be dead witnesses if those people reach this room," Daniel said. "Sarah's right. We give them a target to chase, and your people can evacuate the hospital safely." Dr. Wong stepped forward. "There's a route through the old surgical wing. It was closed down 5 years ago when the new wing opened, but the structure is still intact. If we can get there, we can barricade ourselves until help arrives." "How much help?" Sarah asked Rivera. "State police are 10 minutes out. National Guard maybe 20. But we need to hold that long without civilian casualties." Sarah looked at Daniel. "Can you move?" "I've fought with worse injuries and worse situations." He started disconnecting himself from the monitors. "Besides, I'm not dying in a hospital bed while some mercenary bastards kill innocent people. That's not how this story ends." Rivera made a decision. "All right, I'll coordinate the evacuation and draw most of his forces toward the East Wing. You head west to the old surgical area." "Dr. Wong, you know the layout?" "Better than anyone. I worked there for 15 years before it closed." "Then go. Now. And stay on this radio channel. If you get cornered, we'll try to extract you." They moved Daniel to a wheelchair and headed out into the corridor. The military police wanted to come with them, but Rivera ordered them to stay and reinforce the evacuation routes. Sarah understood the calculation. Better to risk 3 people than to leave hundreds of patients vulnerable. The old surgical wing was accessed through a connecting hallway that had been sealed with a locked door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Dr. Wong's master keycard still worked, and they slipped through into darkness. The air here was stale and dusty. Emergency lighting was minimal, just enough to see basic shapes and obstacles. They moved as quickly as Daniel's condition allowed, Sarah pushing the wheelchair while Dr. Wong navigated. Behind them, Sarah heard gunfire echoing through the main hospital. Short, controlled bursts, the sound of professionals engaging targets. She tried not to think about who was shooting at whom, tried to focus on moving forward. The old surgical wing had the eerie quality of a place frozen in time. Equipment still sat in operating rooms covered with sheets. Gurneys lined the hallways. Medical supplies remained in cabinets as if the staff had simply walked away one day and never returned. "Here," Dr. Wong said, leading them into what had been the main surgical suite. "This room has reinforced walls because of the radiation shielding they installed for imaging equipment. If we can barricade the doors, it'll be difficult to breach." They worked quickly, using every piece of furniture they could move to block the 2 entrances. Daniel helped despite his weakness, and Sarah saw in his movements the muscle memory of someone who'd built defensive positions under fire before. When they finished, they had maybe 10 minutes before anyone discovered where they'd gone. Sarah checked her phone. No signal, which made sense given the building's age and the radiation shielding. "The encryption key," Sarah said to Daniel, "for that second file. Where is it?" Daniel closed his eyes, and for a moment Sarah thought he'd passed out. Then he started reciting a sequence of numbers and letters, 43 characters long. Sarah grabbed a pen from a drawer and wrote them on her arm, checking twice to make sure she had it exactly right. "If something happens to me," Daniel said, "that's the only copy of the key. Everything else was memorized and never written down." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. The door they'd barricaded shook. Someone was testing it, checking if it was locked or just stuck. Then silence. Dr. Wong moved to a small window that looked out over the hospital's west courtyard. "There are armed men down there. 6 that I can see, maybe more. They're not law enforcement." Sarah joined her at the window. The men below were spreading out in a tactical formation, covering all the exits from the old wing, professional, disciplined, and very patient. "They know we're here," Sarah said. Her phone buzzed. Somehow she'd gotten signal back. A text from an unknown number. "You have one chance. Surrender Daniel Cross and the evidence, and everyone walks away alive. You have 5 minutes to decide." Sarah showed the message to Dr. Wong and Daniel. "Don't," Daniel said immediately. "Whatever happens, don't give them anything." Another text arrived. This one was a video. Sarah's hand shook as she opened it. The video showed a hospital corridor, patients and beds being wheeled quickly toward exits. Then it showed 3 men in dark suits, weapons drawn, moving toward those patients. The video ended with a message, 4 minutes, choose wisely. "They're bluffing," Dr. Wong said, but her voice wavered. A third text. Another video. This one showed a nurse Sarah recognized, Kelly Torres, the young nurse who'd been in the trauma bay when Daniel first arrived. She was being held at gunpoint, tears streaming down her face. 3 minutes. Sarah felt rage burning through the fear. These people were willing to terrorize innocents, to threaten a young nurse who'd done nothing but try to help a patient. They were willing to burn down an entire hospital to protect secrets that should have been exposed decades ago. "We need to make them think we're surrendering," Sarah said. "Buy time for Rivera's backup to arrive." "And when they realize we're stalling," Dr. Wong asked, "then we make them work for it." Sarah sent a reply. "How do I know you'll let everyone go?" The response was immediate. "You don't. But you know what I'll do if you refuse. 2 minutes." Sarah looked around the old surgical suite, at the equipment and supplies that remained. She grabbed Dr. Wong's arm. "The oxygen tanks, are they still pressurized?" Dr. Wong checked one. "Yes." "Why?" "Because we're going to give them exactly what they expect. A cornered witness with nowhere left to run. And then we're going to remind them that cornered doesn't mean defeated." Sarah pulled out the flash drive with the evidence and held it up to the window where the men below could see it. Then she sent one final text. "Ground floor, west entrance. I'm coming out alone." Sarah descended the old stairwell with the flash drive visible in her raised hand, each step calculated to project defeat. Behind her, 3 floors up, Dr. Wong and Daniel were rigging the oxygen tanks according to the plan they'd whispered in the 90 seconds before she'd left. The timing had to be perfect. The west entrance opened into a loading area that hadn't been used in years. Broken pallets and abandoned equipment created shadows where armed men could hide. Sarah counted at least 4 positions where she'd place shooters if she were running this operation, which meant there were probably 6. She stopped in the center of the loading area, under the single working light, and held the drive higher. "I'm here. Let the nurse go." A man stepped from behind a concrete pillar, not one of the mercenaries, but someone in an expensive suit despite the chaos. He had the look of a lawyer or executive, someone who gave orders rather than followed them. "Daniel Cross first," the man said. "Where is he?" "Safe. You get the drive, you release your hostages, and then I'll tell you where to find him." The man smiled without warmth. "You misunderstand the situation. We don't negotiate with witnesses. We eliminate them." He pulled out a phone and showed Sarah the screen. Kelly Torres was still being held at gunpoint, but now Sarah could see the location, the hospital's main lobby, visible through the glass doors behind the gunman. There were patients there, elderly people in wheelchairs waiting for transport, families with children who'd come to visit relatives, at least 40 civilians in the immediate vicinity. "You have something I need," the man continued, "and I have something you care about, but unlike you, I'm willing to demonstrate my seriousness." He made a gesture, and the gunman holding Kelly pressed the weapon harder against her temple. Kelly's sob was audible even through the phone's speaker. Sarah's mind raced through options and outcomes. She could throw the drive and run, but they'd gun her down and still go after Daniel. She could try to fight, but she was one injured nurse against at least 6 armed professionals. She could surrender completely, but that would just give them everything they wanted with no guarantee they'd honor any promises. Or she could trust that Dr. Wong had understood the real plan, the one Sarah had conveyed with eye contact and hand signals while they'd pretended to discuss something else. "All right," Sarah said, letting her shoulders slump in apparent defeat. "I'll take you to him, but you have to let Kelly go first. She doesn't know anything." The man considered this, then spoke into his radio. "Release the young nurse. Keep the others under observation." On the phone screen, Sarah saw the gunman step back from Kelly. Another mercenary escorted her toward the hospital's main entrance, pushing her outside into the night. Sarah felt a small measure of relief. At least one innocent person was safe. "Now," the man said, "take me to Cross." Sarah turned and started walking back toward the old surgical wing, the man following at a careful distance. 2 of his mercenaries fell in behind, weapons ready. They moved through the abandoned corridors, past empty rooms and obsolete equipment. Sarah counted steps and seconds. The plan required precise timing and a level of trust she wasn't sure she'd earned. But Dr. Wong had understood. Sarah had seen it in her eyes when she'd said, "Make them work for it," while her fingers had signed a completely different message in the medical shorthand her father had taught her. They reached the 3rd floor. Sarah led them down the corridor toward the barricaded surgical suite, walking slowly to eat up time. The man behind her was growing impatient. "How much further?" "Just ahead. He's weak. He couldn't move far." They rounded the corner and Sarah saw the barricaded door exactly as they'd left it. She stopped about 20 feet away. "He's in there. But you should know something first." The man's eyes narrowed. "What?" "You asked how Daniel survived for 43 years when everyone else from his unit died. You want to know why Hale couldn't find him, couldn't silence him the way he silenced the others? That's not relevant to... It's completely relevant, because Daniel survived by being smarter than the people hunting him, by always having a backup plan, by never ever being where his enemies expected him to be." Understanding flashed across the man's face a half-second before the wall beside him exploded. Dr. Wong had placed the oxygen tanks in an adjacent room, not the surgical suite. She'd rigged them with cannula tubes stretched to their limit, positioned against old heating elements that Daniel had managed to reactivate. The resulting explosion wasn't large enough to bring down the building, but it was more than enough to blow out the wall and send concrete debris flying. Sarah had already dropped and covered her head. The man and his mercenaries weren't as fortunate. The blast caught them in the open, the concussive force throwing them backward. Sarah rolled and came up running, heading not toward the surgical suite, but toward another stairwell she'd spotted during their walk. Behind her, she heard shouting, gunfire, the chaos of men trying to reorganize after an unexpected attack. She hit the stairwell at full speed and took the stairs 3 at a time, despite her injured side. Up, not down. They'd expect her to flee toward the exits. The old surgical wing had 5 floors, and the 5th had been converted to storage before the wing closed. More importantly, it had roof access. Sarah burst through the roof access door into cold night air. The hospital's main building rose beside the old wing, its windows blazing with emergency lights. She could see police vehicles and fire trucks surrounding the complex, see the organized chaos of an evacuation in progress. She also saw armed figures on the roof of the main building, Rivera's people, providing overwatch and sniper coverage. She waved her arms, trying to signal them, but they were focused on other sectors. The roof access door behind her slammed open and 2 mercenaries emerged, weapons drawn. Sarah ran for the roof's edge where a service ladder connected to the main building. It was a 20-foot gap across open air, but the ladder was the only bridge. She grabbed the ladder and started across, not looking down at the 4-story drop. The metal was slick with evening dew, and her hands were shaking from adrenaline and blood loss. Halfway across, she heard a gunshot and felt the ladder vibrate as the bullet struck metal inches from her hand. She kept moving. Another shot, this one closer. Then a different sound. Return fire from the main building's roof. Rivera's snipers had finally spotted the threat. Sarah reached the main building's roof and pulled herself over the ledge, just as several FBI tactical operators converged on her position. "Federal witness," she gasped. "Sarah Mitchell, Colonel Rivera." "We know who you are," one of the operators said, helping her to her feet. "Colonel's been coordinating your position. He figured you'd do something crazy." "The old surgical wing, 3rd floor. Dr. Wong and Daniel Cross are in the surgical suite. They need extraction now." The operator spoke into his radio while others secured the roof access points. Sarah leaned against an HVAC unit, trying to catch her breath and process what had just happened. "Colonel wants you in the command center," the operator said. "Can you walk?" Sarah nodded and let herself be escorted across the roof to another access door. They descended into the main hospital, now eerily quiet with most patients and staff evacuated. The command center had been set up in the hospital administrator's conference room, with multiple screens showing security camera feeds and tactical displays. Colonel Rivera looked up as Sarah entered, his expression cycling through relief, anger, and grudging respect. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen in 30 years of service," he said. "Got their attention away from the patients," Sarah pointed out, "and nearly got yourself killed. Again." But he gestured to a chair. "Sit down before you fall down. Medic." While a medic checked her torn stitches and started yet another IV, Rivera briefed her on the situation. "Your explosion in the old wing worked. Hale's people thought they had you cornered, but when that wall came down, they scattered. We picked up 3 of them trying to flee through the parking structure. The rest barricaded themselves in the east wing. Dr. Wong and Daniel? Extracted safely 5 minutes ago. They're in a secure location off-site." Rivera pulled up a video feed showing the old surgical wing. "Your friend Dr. Wong is a hell of a tactician. She turned that entire floor into a maze of diversions and false leads. By the time Hale's people figured out which room they were actually in, our team had already pulled them out through a maintenance shaft." Sarah felt tension she hadn't known she was carrying finally release. "The drive, did you—" "Still in federal custody, already uploaded to 3 separate secure servers with redundant backups. Even if someone destroys the physical drive now, the evidence is preserved." Rivera sat down across from her. "Daniel gave us the encryption key. We've accessed the second file." His expression told Sarah everything she needed to know about what that file contained. "It's worse than he described, isn't it?" "Much worse. Operation Blackwater was just one of 7 similar operations over a 15-year period. All of them involved eliminating inconvenient witnesses. All of them were sanctioned at the highest levels of the intelligence community." Rivera ran a hand over his face. "We're not just looking at a few corrupt officials anymore. We're looking at systemic abuse that crosses 3 presidential administrations. Will it be enough for prosecutions? The evidence is airtight. Bank records, communications, testimony from Daniel and others. But Sarah," Rivera leaned forward, "the people implicated in this file include sitting senators, federal judges, the former CIA director, and at least 2 current cabinet members. The political pressure to bury this is going to be immense. Then we make sure it goes public before they can bury it, Sarah said. Every major news outlet, every journalist will listen. We flood the zone so thoroughly that it can't be contained. Rivera smiled grimly. Already in motion, I have contacts at the Washington Post, New York Times, and Associated Press. They're receiving encrypted files right now. By morning, this will be front-page news across the country. A tactical officer appeared in the doorway. Colonel, the subjects in the East Wing are requesting to negotiate terms of surrender. Tell them the terms are unconditional surrender within 5 minutes, or we come in and get them. Rivera stood, and make sure they know that every second they delay is being recorded and will be used to demonstrate their consciousness of guilt. The officer left, and Rivera turned back to Sarah. Marcus Hale is in federal custody at a secure facility. His lawyers are already filing motions, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. He's going to spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison. What about the man in the expensive suit, the one who was coordinating in the loading area? Robert Chen, Hale's chief legal counsel and COO of Sentinel Defense Solutions. We picked him up trying to flee through the maintenance tunnels. Turns out he was also involved in Operation Blackwater. He was a junior CIA attorney at the time, helped structure the legal justifications for the black site prisons. Rivera pulled up a photo on his tablet. He's been Hale's fixer for 20 years, making problems disappear. Sarah looked at Chen's photo, at his expensive suit and confident smile, and felt cold satisfaction. Not anymore. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of statements, medical treatment, and coordination with multiple federal agencies. Sarah gave her testimony 3 times to 3 different groups of investigators, each session recorded and witnessed. She showed them the encryption key still written on her arm. She walked them through every decision, every risk, every moment of the night. Dawn was breaking when she finally made it to a quiet room where they'd set up a temporary recovery area. Daniel was there, looking exhausted but more peaceful than she'd ever seen him. Dr. Wong sat beside him, her own statement apparently complete. "You did it," Daniel said when he saw Sarah. "You actually did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected, sitting down heavily in an empty chair. "All of us." "The news is already breaking," Dr. Wong said, showing her phone. "Operation Blackwater revealed, decades of military corruption exposed. They're calling it the biggest military scandal since Abu Ghraib." Sarah read the article, seeing Daniel's name, seeing her own name, seeing the careful documentation of evidence and testimony. The truth, finally being told after 43 years of silence. "What happens now?" she asked. "Congressional hearings," Dr. Wong said. "Criminal trials. Probably years of litigation as everyone implicated tries to save themselves." "And more importantly," Colonel Rivera said, entering the room with a tablet under his arm, "justice. Not perfect justice. It never is. But real accountability for real crimes." He pulled up a live news feed showing Marcus Hale being transferred from federal custody to a maximum security detention center. The former CEO looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, surrounded by U.S. Marshals. His company's stock crashed 30 minutes after the news broke, Rivera said. Board of Directors is voting to remove him. Government contracts are being suspended pending investigation. Sentinel Defense Solutions will be lucky to survive the week. Sarah watched Hale disappear into the detention center and felt something shift inside her. Not quite satisfaction, the cost had been too high for that, but a sense of completion, of a debt finally paid. "There's something else," Rivera said, his tone shifting. "The laundry cart. The one where you hid the third drive." Sarah had almost forgotten about that final backup. "Did you find it?" "Better. The cart was delivered to the cardiac unit at 6 this morning, just like clockwork. One of the nurses found your note wrapped around the drive and immediately brought it to security. That nurse," Rivera pulled up another photo, "is Kelly Torres." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. Kelly, who'd been terrified and held at gunpoint, who'd been released because Sarah had bargained for her freedom. Kelly had found the evidence and made sure it reached the right hands. "She wants to see you," Rivera said. "When you're ready." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Over the next week, Cedar Falls transformed into the center of a media firestorm. Reporters from every major outlet descended on Mercy Point General, though security kept them away from the actual hospital. Sarah gave one carefully prepared statement with Rivera present, then refused all other interview requests. Daniel gave testimony before a closed congressional committee, his words transcribed and classified but leaked within hours to multiple news organizations. The leaks were strategic, Rivera later told Sarah. He'd made sure certain journalists got access to ensure the truth couldn't be buried. The arrests came in waves. First, the obvious targets: Hale's associates at Sentinel Defense Solutions, the mercenaries who'd attacked the hospital. Then the bigger fish: Senator Patricia Grimm, who'd been accepting bribes to push defense contracts Hale's way. Deputy CIA Director Thomas Walsh, who'd helped coordinate the cover-up of Operation Blackwater. Each arrest generated new headlines, new revelations, new connections to a web of corruption that seemed to grow more complex by the day. Sarah watched it unfold from a hotel room where Rivera had placed her under protective custody. She gave statements to prosecutors, reviewed evidence, prepared for the trials that would inevitably come. But mostly she tried to process what had happened, tried to reconcile the quiet nurse she'd been with, the person who'd defied armed mercenaries and exposed government corruption. 2 weeks after that night in the hospital, Sarah received a visitor. The woman who entered her hotel room was in her 70s, with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. She introduced herself as Margaret Cross, Daniel's younger sister. "I wanted to thank you," Margaret said, sitting down in the chair Sarah offered, "for believing him, for fighting for him, for making sure he didn't die alone and forgotten like the others." "How is he?" Sarah asked. "Recovering. The military has given him full medical care at Walter Reed. They're treating him like the hero he always was." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "For 43 years I watched my brother waste away, watched him turn into someone I barely recognized. The nightmares, the paranoia, the constant running. I thought I'd lost him." "He never lost himself," Sarah said. "He just had to hide to survive. Because of you, he doesn't have to hide anymore. Because of you, 19 families finally have answers about what happened to their sons and brothers and fathers." Margaret reached across and took Sarah's hand. "That matters. More than you can know." After Margaret left, Sarah stood at the hotel window and looked out at Cedar Falls. The media circus was finally dying down, the reporters moving on to new stories. But the investigations continued, the trials were being scheduled, and the truth was no longer a secret carried by dying old men. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Wong. "Daniel wants to attend the memorial service. I think he's ready. Are you?" Sarah had heard about the memorial. The military was planning a formal ceremony to honor the 19 soldiers who died in Operation Blackwater. Full military honors, recognition of their service, acknowledgement of the injustice they'd suffered. She texted back, "I'll be there." The memorial was held at Arlington National Cemetery 3 weeks later on a cold morning in December. Sarah stood beside Daniel, who was in his old dress uniform that somehow still fit despite everything. Dr. Wong was there, and Colonel Rivera, and families who'd waited 4 decades for this moment. A general Sarah didn't recognize gave a speech about sacrifice and betrayal, about institutional failures and the importance of accountability. It was a good speech, probably written by committee, but Sarah could see it wasn't what the families needed. What they needed was when Daniel stepped forward, leaning heavily on a cane, and spoke about each of the 19 men by name. He told stories about who they'd been before that final mission, their jokes, their dreams, their humanity. He made them real in a way that official ceremonies never could. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the assembled crowd. Afterward, as people dispersed to individual grave sites, Colonel Rivera pulled Sarah aside. "There's something you should know. The Justice Department is offering you a position." Sarah blinked. "What kind of position?" "Witness protection coordination, specifically working with military whistleblowers and classified testimony cases. They want someone who understands both the medical side and the operational security requirements. Someone who's proven they won't back down when things get difficult." "I'm a nurse, not a federal agent." "You're someone who saved a crucial witness and exposed one of the largest military corruption scandals in history. That's exactly the kind of person they need." Rivera handed her a business card. "Think about it. No pressure, but the offer's there if you want it." Sarah pocketed the card and turned her attention back to the memorial. She watched families placing flowers on grave markers, Watched Daniel speaking quietly with a woman whose father had died in Operation Blackwater. Watched the honor guard standing at attention. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number. "This is Kelly Torres. I know you're probably busy, but I wanted you to know I'm transferring to the VA hospital, going to work with veterans who need advocates. You inspired me. Thank you." Sarah smiled and pocketed her phone. She thought about her father, about the stories he'd told when the alcohol let him speak truth. About the way he'd taught her that sometimes the quietest people were the ones who changed the world, because they didn't waste energy on announcements, they just did what needed doing. As the ceremony concluded and people began to leave, Sarah noticed a group of reporters being held back by security. One of them managed to shout a question. "Ms. Mitchell, is it true that you're planning to write a book about what happened?" Sarah walked over to the security line, and the reporters surged forward with cameras and microphones. "I'm not writing a book," she said clearly. "This isn't my story to tell. It belongs to Daniel Cross and the 19 soldiers who didn't make it home. It belongs to every veteran who was betrayed by the system they served. My part was small. I just refused to look away when it mattered. But you risked your life. Nurses risk their lives every day for patients. Soldiers risk their lives for missions they're told are righteous. The real story here isn't about individual heroism. It's about what happens when institutions choose power over truth, and what it takes to make them accountable." She turned away from the reporters and walked back to where Daniel stood with Dr. Wong. "Media still hounding you?" Dr. Wong asked. "They'll move on eventually. They always do." Daniel was looking at the grave markers, his expression distant. "I used to dream about this day, about standing here and knowing they'd been honored, but I never thought I'd actually see it." "You earned it," Sarah said. 43 years of carrying that weight, never giving up. That's the real heroism." "I almost did give up, so many times." Daniel turned to face her. "If you hadn't been there that night, if you hadn't known that code, if you hadn't been willing to fight, I'd have died in that trauma bay, and the truth would have died with me." "Then it's good I was there," Sarah said simply. They stood together in silence, three people who'd been in the wrong place at the right time, who'd made choices that had cascaded into consequences none of them could have predicted. As they walked back toward the parking area, Colonel Rivera fell into step beside them. "Preliminary trial date has been set for Marcus Hale," he said. 6 months from now. The prosecution wants both of you as key witnesses." "We'll be there," Daniel said immediately. "There's something else, something the prosecutors uncovered during their investigation." Rivera pulled out his phone and showed them a document. Hale kept records, detailed records of every operation, every payoff, every elimination. "We think he was building insurance, making sure that if he ever went down, he could take everyone else with him." "But he didn't use it," Sarah said. "Even when we had him cornered, he never threatened to expose the others." "Because he believed he'd win. He believed the system would protect him like it always had. That arrogance, that absolute certainty that he was untouchable, that's what brought him down." Rivera pocketed his phone. "The prosecutors are using his own records to build cases against at least 30 additional defendants. This is going to take years to fully unravel." "Good," Daniel said. "Let it take years. Let every detail come to light. Let everyone who thought they could hide behind classifications and institutional power learn that truth doesn't have an expiration date." They reached the parking area where a government car waited to take Daniel back to Walter Reed. Before he got in, he turned to Sarah one last time. "What are you going to do now, after all this?" Sarah thought about Colonel Rivera's job offer, about Kelly Torres transferring to work with veterans, about all the ways one night of choices could reshape a life. "I'm going to keep being a nurse," she said, "but maybe I'll be a nurse who remembers that sometimes patient advocacy means fighting battles that go way beyond the bedside." Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Your father would be proud." After he left, Sarah stood in the parking lot with Dr. Wong, watching the memorial service conclude in the distance. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What comes next?" "Retirement, I think. I've been practicing medicine for 40 years, and I'm tired." Dr. Wong looked at the cemetery, at the rows of white markers. "But I'm glad I was here for this. Glad I could help make one thing right before I hung up my stethoscope." They parted with promises to stay in touch, and Sarah made her way to her rental car. As she drove back toward Cedar Falls, she passed news vans still camped out near the hospital, still chasing the story. Her phone rang. Colonel Rivera. "Turn on the news," he said without preamble. Sarah pulled over and opened a news app on her phone. The headline made her catch her breath. Former CIA director arrested in Blackwater scandal. Evidence links him to decades of illegal operations. The article included photos, timelines, and quotes from prosecutors. It detailed how Daniel's encrypted files had provided the missing links in cases that had been cold for years. It showed the systematic nature of the corruption, the way power had been wielded without oversight or accountability. And at the bottom of the article was a quote from an unnamed federal witness. Sarah recognized her own words from one of her depositions. The remarkable thing isn't that the conspiracy lasted 43 years. It's that it took one dying soldier and one nurse to bring it down. That should tell you everything you need to know about how thoroughly our institutions had failed. Sarah sat in her parked car and read every article she could find. Each new revelation, each new arrest, each new detail of the scandal. The scope of it was staggering. Hundreds of millions in fraudulent contracts, dozens of eliminated witnesses, an entire shadow system of justice that operated outside any democratic oversight. And it had ended because she'd been working the night shift when an old man had arrived at her hospital, because she'd remembered a phrase her father had taught her, because she'd chosen to trust her instincts over protocol. Her phone rang again. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Catherine Walsh from the Washington Post. I know you're not doing interviews, but I wanted to let you know. We've received information that there's a coordinated campaign to discredit you and Daniel Cross. Paid social media accounts, fake news stories, attempts to paint you both as conspiracy theorists. We're running a story tomorrow exposing the campaign and tracking the money back to legal defense funds for some of the accused." Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. Of course they'd try this. Of course they'd fight back any way they could. "Are you ready for that fight?" Catherine asked. Sarah thought about her father, dying alone because the weight of truth had crushed him. She thought about Daniel, running for 43 years. She thought about the 19 soldiers who'd never had the chance to defend themselves. "I've been ready," she said. "Bring it on." The coordinated attack launched 72 hours later, exactly as Catherine Walsh had warned. Sarah woke to find her name trending on social media, but not for the reason she'd hoped. Fabricated screenshots showed her allegedly accepting money from foreign intelligence services. Deepfake videos portrayed her making statements she'd never said. Anonymous accounts with thousands of followers posted detailed threads questioning her mental stability, her motives, her credibility. By noon, 3 cable news networks had run segments questioning whether the entire Blackwater scandal might be an elaborate hoax. They brought on experts who cast doubt on the evidence, who suggested the encrypted files could have been manufactured, who painted Daniel as a disturbed veteran and Sarah as a nurse with delusions of grandeur. Sarah sat in her hotel room watching the character assassination unfold with a strange sense of detachment. She'd expected this, had prepared for it even. But seeing it happen in real time, watching respected journalists give platform to obvious lies, still sent rage burning through her chest. Her phone rang. "Colonel Rivera." "Don't respond to any of it," he said immediately. "That's what they want, to draw you into a public fight where they can control the narrative." "So I just let them lie?" "No. You let the evidence speak. The Washington Post is running their expose in 3 hours. The New York Times has a follow-up ready for tomorrow. We've got a coordinated media strategy that will bury these clowns in facts." Rivera's voice was steel. "Trust the process." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to fight back immediately, but she forced herself to think tactically. The people orchestrating this smear campaign had resources and experience. They'd anticipated public outrage and prepared to discredit the witnesses before trials could even begin. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated how thoroughly Colonel Rivera and his team had documented everything. The Washington Post article dropped at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Sarah read it on her phone, her hands shaking with a mixture of anger and vindication. The headline, "The Anatomy of a Smear: How Defense Contractors Spent $4.2 Million Trying to Silence a Whistleblower." The article was devastating. It traced the fake social media accounts back to a PR firm hired by a legal defense fund connected to Sentinel Defense Solutions. It showed screenshots of internal communications discussing strategy for discrediting Sarah and Daniel. It included testimony from a former employee of the PR firm who'd been horrified by what they were being asked to do and had turned over everything to the Post. Most damning of all, it revealed that Marcus Hale himself had approved the campaign from his detention cell, using his lawyers as intermediaries. The backlash was immediate and fierce. The PR firm's other clients began distancing themselves. The defense lawyers who'd served as intermediaries faced ethics complaints, and prosecutors added witness tampering and obstruction of justice to Hale's already extensive list of charges. Sarah's phone exploded with messages of support. Kelly Torres sent a simple text, "Still proud to know you." Dr. Wong called to check on her mental state and remind her to eat something. Daniel's message was longer, a rambling note about how proud he was and how she'd handled pressure better than soldiers twice her age. But the message that surprised her most came from an email address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "From a colleague." She opened it cautiously. "Ms. Mitchell, you don't know me, but I'm a nurse at Walter Reed. I've been caring for Daniel Cross since he was transferred here. I wanted you to know that every nurse on this floor has been following your story. What you did, standing up to people who thought they were untouchable, risking everything for a patient nobody else believed in, that's what nursing is supposed to be. We're all proud to share the profession with you. Michelle Zhao, RN." Sarah read the email 3 times, feeling something tight in her chest finally loosen. She'd been so focused on the attacks, on defending herself and Daniel, that she'd forgotten about the people who understood what she'd really done and why it mattered. Over the next 2 weeks, the smear campaign collapsed under the weight of its own dishonesty. More whistleblowers came forward from the PR firm. Journalists dug deeper into the defense fund's finances and found connections to shell corporations and offshore accounts. Every attempt to discredit the Blackwater evidence just generated more evidence of conspiracy and cover-up. Sarah returned to Cedar Falls to find the city had changed. People recognized her on the street, some with gratitude, some with suspicion, but all with recognition. The hospital had placed her on paid administrative leave pending an internal review of her actions that night, which Sarah understood was bureaucratic code for, "We don't know how to handle this situation." She used the time to prepare for the trials, working with prosecutors to organize testimony and evidence. The legal proceedings were labyrinthine. Multiple defendants, multiple jurisdictions, complex questions of classified information and national security. But the prosecutors were determined, and they had something defendants' lawyers couldn't overcome: the truth, documented in excruciating detail. The first trial began in April. Marcus Hale faced 17 federal charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to obstruction of justice to wire fraud. Sarah sat in the gallery for jury selection, watching Hale's expensive legal team work to shape a jury that might be sympathetic to their client. Hale himself looked diminished. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by cheap court-provided attire. The arrogance had been replaced by something harder to read. Maybe fear, maybe rage, maybe just the exhaustion of someone who'd finally been cornered after decades of running. When his eyes met Sarah's across the courtroom, she didn't look away. She wanted him to see that she wasn't afraid, that she'd never been afraid of him, only of failing the people who needed her. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Sarah testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every moment from Daniel's arrival at the hospital to the final confrontation. Hale's lawyers tried to shake her testimony, tried to paint her as an unstable nurse who'd violated protocol and endangered patients. But the evidence was overwhelming. The flash drives, the recordings, the testimony from dozens of witnesses. Most damning was Hale's own recorded conversation in the shipping office, where he'd admitted to decades of corruption and threatened Sarah's life. The jury deliberated for 14 hours. When they returned, Sarah was back in the gallery, sitting beside Dr. Wong and Colonel Rivera. Daniel was there too, having been brought in under heavy security from Walter Reed. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find? Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Sarah felt Daniel's hand grip hers, felt tears burning in her eyes. On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find? Guilty. 17 charges, 17 guilty verdicts. When the foreman finished reading, Hale's shoulders slumped and his lawyers immediately began preparing appeals. But everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. Marcus Hale would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the interim, other trials proceeded. Robert Chen, Hale's fixer, received a similar verdict. The former CIA deputy director was convicted on 12 counts. Senator Grimm resigned before her trial and pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony against others. Each conviction felt like another brick removed from a wall that had stood for 43 years. Each sentence was another acknowledgement that the system, while slow and imperfect, could still deliver justice when enough people refused to look away. Sarah attended Hale's sentencing hearing on a bright morning in June. The courtroom was packed with victims' families, journalists, and curious observers. Federal marshals lined the walls, though Hale was no longer considered a flight risk. Where would he run that the evidence wouldn't follow? The judge was a stern woman in her 70s named Margaret Chen, with a reputation for harsh sentences and no tolerance for corruption. She'd read every piece of evidence, every testimony, every detail of what Hale had done. "Mr. Hale," Judge Chen said, looking down at the man who'd once commanded respect and fear in equal measure, "in 38 years on the bench, I have never encountered a case of such profound betrayal of public trust. You were given authority to protect this nation and its citizens. Instead, you used that authority to enrich yourself and eliminate anyone who threatened your wealth and power." Hale stood silent, his lawyers flanking him. 19 soldiers died because you chose money over honor. Dozens of witnesses were murdered or intimidated into silence. Families spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones while you lived in luxury built on their suffering. Judge Chen's voice was granite. This court finds no mitigating factors, no reason for leniency, no possibility of rehabilitation that would justify anything less than the maximum sentence allowable by law. She sentenced him to 43 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, one for each year he'd evaded justice. The number was symbolic. Hale would die in prison long before serving even a fraction of that time. But the symbolism mattered. As marshals led Hale from the courtroom, he stopped and looked directly at Sarah. For a moment she thought he might say something, might finally show remorse or acknowledgement. Instead, he just shook his head slightly, as if even now he couldn't quite believe that a nurse and a dying soldier had brought down his empire. Sarah held his gaze until he was escorted through the door and out of her life forever. Outside the courthouse, a press conference had been organized. Sarah stood at a podium with Daniel on one side and Colonel Rivera on the other, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. "I'll keep this brief," Sarah said, reading from notes she'd prepared, but mostly speaking from the heart. "This case was never about me or Daniel Cross or any individual person. It was about accountability. It was about the principle that no one, regardless of power or wealth or connections, is above the law." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 43 years ago, 19 soldiers died because the people sworn to protect them chose to betray them instead. For 4 decades, their families lived without answers, while the man responsible lived in luxury. That injustice has now been corrected, not because the system worked automatically, but because people chose to make it work. Daniel Cross, who never gave up despite having every reason to. Dr. Patricia Wong, who decided not to make the same mistake twice. Colonel Rivera and his team, who followed the evidence no matter where it led. And yes, I was there too, doing what any nurse should do, advocating for a patient who needed help. "Ms. Mitchell," a reporter shouted, "what's next for you?" Sarah smiled. "I'm going back to work. The hospital has reinstated me with full honors, and I start my new position next week." "New position?" "Director of Patient Advocacy at Mercy Point General. My job will be to ensure that every patient, regardless of their background or circumstances, receives the care and respect they deserve. That no one is dismissed or underestimated because they don't fit someone's idea of what a valuable patient looks like." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, but Sarah could see Daniel was tiring. She wrapped up the press conference and helped him to a waiting car that would take him back to Walter Reed. "Thank you," Daniel said before he left. "For everything. For believing me when no one else did. For fighting when it would have been easier to walk away. For making sure they didn't die for nothing." "They died because someone betrayed them," Sarah said. But they're remembered now because you never gave up. That's on you, not me." Daniel smiled, looking a decade younger than he had that night in the trauma bay. "Your father would be so damn proud of you. I hope you know that." After he left, Sarah stood on the courthouse steps and looked out at the city. Cedar Falls had returned to normal. The media circus moved on to other stories. But Sarah knew the ripples from that night would continue spreading for years. Kelly Torres had indeed transferred to the VA hospital and was already making waves with her advocacy for veteran patients. Dr. Wong had officially retired but was consulting on cases involving military whistleblowers. Colonel Rivera had been promoted and was now heading a task force investigating other potential military corruption cases. And Sarah had discovered something about herself that night in the hospital. She'd always known she was good at her job, competent and reliable, but she'd never realized she had the capacity for the kind of courage that changed lives. That when the moment demanded it, she could be more than just a skilled professional. She could be someone who refused to accept injustice, even when fighting it meant risking everything. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, but this time she recognized the pattern. It was the encrypted service Colonel Rivera's team used for secure communications. "Sarah, we have a situation. Military whistleblower, high-level intelligence information, currently hiding in San Diego and refusing to trust anyone, asking specifically for you. Are you available? Rivera." Sarah looked at the message for a long moment. She thought about her new position at the hospital, about the quiet life she could have just accepting the promotion and letting other people fight other battles. Then she thought about her father, about the secrets that had killed him, about Daniel, who'd spent 43 years carrying a burden alone, about 19 soldiers who died believing no one would ever hold their betrayers accountable. She typed back, "Send me the details." 2 days later, Sarah was on a plane to San Diego with credentials identifying her as a federal witness protection specialist. The whistleblower was a Navy intelligence analyst who'd discovered evidence of a new corruption scheme, different from Blackwater but equally devastating. She was 26 years old, terrified, and convinced that coming forward would destroy her life. Sarah met her in a safe house, showed her the scars from her own bullet wound, and told her the truth. "Yes, this will be hard. Yes, there will be people who try to destroy you for speaking up, but I'm here to make sure you survive it, and I'm here to make sure your evidence reaches people who will act on it. You're not alone in this." The analyst's name was Lieutenant Jennifer Park, and over the next 6 hours she told Sarah about systematic fraud in naval procurement, about falsified inspection reports on ships that put sailors' lives at risk, about contractors who'd been bribing officers for a decade. Sarah listened, documented, and called Colonel Rivera. Within 24 hours, they had Jennifer in protective custody, and federal investigators were opening a new case. Within a week, the first arrests were made. Sarah returned to Cedar Falls and started her new position at Mercy Point General. The hospital had undergone its own reckoning after the Blackwater case, implementing new protocols for patient advocacy and staff support. Sarah's office was small but functional, and she spent her days meeting with patients who felt unheard, investigating complaints, and building systems to ensure no one fell through the cracks. But twice a month, she got calls from Colonel Rivera about whistleblowers who needed someone they could trust, someone who understood what it meant to stand up against impossible odds, someone who'd proven she wouldn't back down when things got dangerous. Sarah said yes to every case. The Navy analyst led to a defense contractor scandal. That scandal led to a State Department whistleblower. That whistleblower led to an Army procurement case. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same. Someone with information, someone with courage, someone who just needed one person to believe them and fight alongside them. 6 months after Hale's sentencing, Sarah received an invitation to speak at a nursing conference in Washington, D.C. The topic was patient advocacy in extraordinary circumstances. She accepted, though public speaking had never been her strength. The conference was held in a massive hotel ballroom packed with nurses from across the country. Sarah stood at the podium and looked out at hundreds of faces, many of them young nurses just starting their careers. "I didn't plan to become known for a single night in November," she began. "I didn't set out to expose government corruption or become a witness in a major federal case. I was just doing my job, taking care of a patient who needed help." She told them about Daniel, about recognizing that his violence wasn't madness, but trained response, about choosing to listen rather than sedate, about every decision that had followed from that first choice to see him as a person rather than a problem. "Here's what I learned," Sarah continued. "The most powerful thing any nurse can do is refuse to look away. When you see injustice, when you see a patient being dismissed or discredited or mistreated, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't convince yourself that you're just one person and can't make a difference." She paused, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "You are one person, but one person who refuses to accept injustice can change everything. One person who listens when others dismiss, one person who documents when others forget, one person who fights when others surrender." Her voice grew stronger. "That's not heroism. That's nursing. That's what we're supposed to do. Advocate for our patients, protect the vulnerable, speak for those who can't speak for themselves." The applause started before she finished, building to a standing ovation that left Sarah overwhelmed. But what struck her most was the faces in the crowd. Young nurses with tears in their eyes, older nurses nodding in recognition, people of all backgrounds united in the understanding that their work mattered, that they had power, that one person truly could make a difference. After the speech, Sarah was surrounded by nurses wanting to share their own stories. Cases where they'd advocated for patients and been ignored. Situations where they'd tried to report problems and been told to stay quiet. Instances where they'd felt powerless and alone. Sarah listened to every story, gave every person her full attention, and shared what she'd learned. Document everything, find allies, don't fight alone, and never ever give up. One nurse, an older woman named Patricia, waited until everyone else had left before approaching. "I worked with your father," Patricia said quietly, "at the VA hospital in Seattle before he died. He used to talk about his daughter who was going to be a great nurse someday. He'd be so proud of what you've become." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. "He never got to see me graduate nursing school. The alcohol was how he tried to survive carrying secrets that should never have been his to carry alone," Patricia interrupted gently. "But he survived long enough to teach you what you needed to know, and you used that knowledge to do what he couldn't, bring truth into the light." She squeezed Sarah's hand. "He's proud. I promise you that." That night, alone in her hotel room, Sarah allowed herself to cry for the first time since everything had begun. She cried for her father, for Daniel, for the 19 soldiers who'd never come home. She cried for Jennifer Park and all the other whistleblowers she'd helped, for the cost of truth-telling, for the weight of knowing things she could never unknow. But when she finished crying, she felt lighter, as if some burden she'd been carrying since her father's death had finally been acknowledged and could now be set down. The next morning, she flew back to Cedar Falls and returned to work at Mercy Point General. Her inbox was full, patient complaints to investigate, cases to review, problems to solve. Normal work, the kind that didn't make headlines but mattered just as much. During her lunch break, she checked the news and saw that the Blackwater trials were still generating coverage. 2 more defendants had been convicted. Congressional hearings were examining how the cover-up had lasted so long. Families were finally getting answers and closure. Her phone rang. Daniel's number. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his voice stronger than she'd heard it in months. "I'm being discharged from Walter Reed next week. Clean bill of health, or as clean as you get at 73? "That's wonderful. What will you do?" "I've been asked to speak at military academies, talk to young officers about honor and accountability and the importance of standing up even when it's hard." He paused. "I never thought I'd be teaching anyone anything after all this time running and hiding. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the only way to make those 43 years mean something is to make sure the next generation does better." "They will," Sarah said, "because you'll make sure they understand what's at stake." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria and watched the normal chaos of a weekday lunch rush. Doctors grabbing quick meals between surgeries, nurses swapping stories about difficult patients, families visiting loved ones, the everyday miracle of a hospital functioning, of lives being saved and suffering being eased. This was why she'd become a nurse. Not for the dramatic moments or the headlines, but for this, the quiet work of caring for people when they were most vulnerable, of being present when it mattered, of making a difference one patient at a time. But now she also knew she was capable of more when circumstances demanded it. That quiet strength could become fierce advocacy. That one nurse standing up for one patient could cascade into justice for hundreds. That refusing to look away could change the world. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Arlington National Cemetery again, this time for the dedication of a memorial to Operation Blackwater. 19 names carved in black granite, along with a plaque explaining what had happened and why these soldiers deserved to be remembered. Daniel was there, looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. The families were there, finally able to visit a place that honored their loved ones. Colonel Rivera, Dr. Wong, even Kelly Torres, who'd driven up from her new position at the VA hospital. The ceremony was simple but profound. A general spoke about the cost of betrayal and the importance of accountability. A chaplain offered words about memory and justice, and then each family member placed a flower at the base of the memorial while a bugler played taps. When it was over, Sarah stood with Daniel in front of the memorial, reading the names carved in stone. "They didn't die for nothing," Daniel said quietly. "That's what I needed to know, that their deaths meant something, that someone would remember, that the truth would matter." "The truth always matters," Sarah replied. "It just sometimes takes a long time to come out." They walked together toward the parking area, neither in a hurry to leave. Daniel was heading to Colorado to speak at the Air Force Academy. Sarah was returning to Cedar Falls and her work at the hospital. Their paths had crossed for one crucial night and then diverged again into separate lives. But they would always be connected by what they'd done together, by the choice they'd both made to fight when surrender would have been easier. As Sarah drove out of Arlington, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a trauma nurse working the night shift to someone who'd exposed government corruption and helped bring down a criminal empire. From feeling powerless to discovering she had more power than she'd ever imagined. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Colonel Rivera about another whistleblower who needed help. Sarah smiled and pulled over to read the details. There would always be more cases, more people who needed advocates, more battles to fight. And Sarah would be there, ready to listen, ready to fight, ready to make sure that no one ever had to face injustice alone. She was just a nurse. But she'd learned that just a nurse was one of the most powerful things a person could be. Someone who saw suffering and refused to accept it, who heard cries for help and answered them, who stood between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything. Sarah pulled back onto the highway and headed home, ready for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that one person truly could make a difference. That quiet strength was still strength. That nurses who advocated for their patients could change the world. And somewhere in a maximum security prison, Marcus Hale sat in a cell, his empire destroyed, his legacy in ruins, brought down by the people he'd most underestimated, a dying soldier who refused to give up, and a nurse who refused to look away. The truth had won. Justice had been served. And the quiet ones, the dismissed ones, the underestimated ones, had proven that they were the most dangerous people of all when they finally decided to fight back.